Warm welcome to all of you to Intersections. How are all of you doing? I want to invite you to use the chat window as we do through this program to stay connected, both to our conversation here, but also to each other. Share, as so many of you are doing, where you're calling in from today. We are a global family, and I'd love to hear and connect with as many of you as we can here on chat. So welcome again. Today's conversation is something that really in some ways strikes to the core of what is happening in humanity today. We are in some ways being deeply humbled by the virus in recognizing that our institutions, our practices in society and organizations and institutions, and our leaders, know a few things, but also don't know a lot. And it has been humbling to recognize that a lot of solutions for what will allow us to build a better world, a more stable, a more secure, a more connected world, a lot of those solutions are still to come. And the work of Amy Edmondson, our guest for today, is seminal in helping provide a pathway towards building the kinds of capabilities and sensibilities that we need both in our leaders and in our teams and organizations and society to get us there. Why? Because if not any single expert or leader is going to have the answers, then the answers will have to come from the collective, which is what she has invested so much heart and thought into for all these years. So it is a great pleasure and privilege for me to give you a little bit more background on Amy before then I invite her to the conversation as well in just a couple of minutes. So here you go. Amy is a leadership expert, professor and at Harvard Business School and a psychologist. She has had her education in visual environmental studies and engineering, and then a master's degree in psychology, PhD in organizational behavior, all from Harvard. And has been over the last many years a distinguished scholar, thinker, and speaker. Her role at Harvard Business School, of course, has given her a tremendous platform through which to incubate and experiment and evolve and ultimately find a voice for this work. She has been recognized globally for her contributions to the advancement of management science, ranked number 3 in the Thinkers 50 2019 list, and in the HR magazine as one of the most influential international thinkers in human resources year upon year. Her work has come to very concrete fruition in ideas, thoughts, articles, talks in many of these very storied publications and platforms, including TED and the New York Times. And she has written a number of books that have gained their own acclaim for codifying these ideas that she has researched and discovered over time around themes like innovation and learning and teaming, and then most recently, creating a fearless organization, a book that has been translated into many languages and deemed a groundbreaking blueprint to creating a fear-free culture. She's an acclaimed voice on leadership, and with that little bit of background, for those who needed any background on Amy, since I know many of you are very familiar with her work, so many of you have written to me and my team thanking us and appreciating this opportunity to have Amy with us on the show. And it is my great pleasure, therefore, to welcome you here, Amy. Thank you for joining us today.
You are welcome, and thank you for that most gracious and generous introduction. I'm just delighted to be here and appreciate all that you just said.
Thank you. I say that with a lot of personal appreciation, because I have been a big fan of your work for many years. You might remember times in the past where I've called you and you've shown such grace and thoughtfulness and patience and just educating me on kind of how to do the mapping between the beautiful ideas that you have put out there and the real world challenges or problems that some organizations that I was consulting with at that time faced. So it really struck a deep chord with me that here is someone who is not just out there to do and maximize her footprint, but really seeking to have deep impact, seeking to have real results and outcomes happen. So Amy, let's do this. To start, let me just quickly lay out what I see as like 3 big pillars of your work. And I'm doing this to ask you, what am I missing? What am I not seeing? If you had to just synthesize for our audience here, what are like the key things that you have uncovered that are, import to the world today? What would those be? And so the three things that I saw, one is that we have to build learning cultures. We have to build learning organizations, not just about performing, but also about learning. So that's number one. The second is that central to learning is failure. That failure is not something that we should shrug under the rug or feel embarrassed or awkward or try to avoid, but it's something we have to learn to embrace. And even as we are doing that, we have to, this is something I loved from an earlier Harvard Business Review article from you, we have to be able to differentiate between smart failures and dumb failures, because there are dumb failures still. And so failures and the right relationship with them. And then the third and last is, well, if you want to build this learning culture, you recognize there's a lot of things you don't know, and you want to be open to diagnosing and even walking into, at times, experimental domains where there's failure, then you need to create psychological safety, because you need to harness the wisdom of the crowds, the collective intelligence of your team. And the only way to do that is that they all feel safe and comfortable in being part of that dialogue and the discourse about what happened, what could have happened, and here's a new idea and all of that. So those are the three things that I see. To tell me if that sort of, is halfway there, or what else do we need to do to fully inform our audience here about, the core pillars of your work?
You're a very good student, Hitendra. You're a very good, a good digester of many articles, many books, many articles. Let me try to use that as a useful platform. I will say that your first and third pillar, to me, blur a little bit. To me, a psychologically safe environment is almost, not quite definitionally, but almost one and the same as a learning culture, right? I just don't see how you can learn collectively, especially, not as much individually, unless you've got psychological safety. So I want to talk more about that, and maybe add on to those two, tightly related to those two, the notion of teaming, and that, like it or not, we, most of us, face work that is deeply interdependent with others, right? So we can no longer just, stay in our lane, do our jobs, work hard and get the rewards of having worked hard, and all will be well. It's like, no. I mean, most of what we do, whether you're in B2B sales or drug development, or even developing and teaching a course, you're doing it with others. You're doing it in such a way that their ideas, their expertise are absolutely essential to making progress. And you did mention with the third one, psychological safety, that's all about finding ways to harness collective intelligence. And collective intelligence is, by its nature, diverse intelligence, that people have different backgrounds, different expertise, different training, different ideas. And unless that's brought together, the work, the output is going to be suboptimal. And then I will say, I love that you highlight failures as one of the three pillars, and I would agree with that. In fact, I think it's the one area, other than the Harvard Business Review article, which is, I think, a useful and simple framework for people. Other than that one article, I haven't done enough with this. I talk a lot about it. I speak a lot about it, but I'm not sure I've written enough about it. So that's on the to-do list. And let me just bounce off a minute on that dumb failure versus smart failure, because you're right. I think there's been a sort of period in management, popular management articles and discussion that sort of celebrates failure. Failure is good. Well, yes and no, right? Not all failure is good. Come on. That's, it's obvious, but unless we talk about it, then the reality is people still won't feel comfortable with and revealing the good kind of failure, right? If we don't make clear distinctions between what you called smart failure and dumb failure, we really won't be harnessing the power of smart failure, because people intuitively know, nah, I don't think so. Failure is not so good. And there are two kinds of dumb failure. Like, one is the kind that individuals make. I mean, when I put the milk back in the cupboard and the cereal in the fridge, that's a dumb failure. that I made all by myself, right, with no help. But the kind of dumb failure that I'm really passionate about and love and study often is the kind where organizations make really stupid decisions. They launch a product that has real flaws. They acquire a company even when the acquisition doesn't make sense. Now you could say, but hey, there was uncertainty. We didn't know that. But it turns out when you do the anatomy of many of these failures, there were people in the team, in the organization, who had grave concerns, but their voices weren't heard. And so then this becomes a situation of dumb failure at the collective level, right? At the organizational or team level.
Yeah. Let's explore that a little bit more at the organizational level. It seems to me from your work that we can add on one more attribute to what a dumb failure is, which is let's play with that scenario that you just gave of the failure of that product, which there were some people who had reservations about, but their voice was not heard. Now, I think you also highlighted the importance of what happens after that, right? Once you have seen that the product has failed, do you shove that outcome under the rug, or do you actually bring it out and pull apart the process of product development and product piloting and launch and see like what went wrong in that process? And so many case studies and examples that you've given in kind of like a postmodern way, allow us to learn how to learn from failure.
Yeah, and that is one of the most important aspects of that whole domain. We don't celebrate failure just to celebrate failure. We celebrate failure for its learning value. But we can't get its learning value unless we do the hard work of failure analysis. And too often that work is done superficially or not done at all. And when I say superficially, I mean, we come away with conclusions that are self-serving, like the customers just weren't ready for our fantastic thing. It wasn't us, it was them. Or we look at one level down, but we don't do the deeper work of where we made our own mistakes or missteps and contributed to the failure.
Yeah. I'm reminded of this moment. I have only like a fuzzy recollection of it, but it was a moment that really struck with me in the light of some of these ideas that you offered. And it's from this movie on Martin Luther King and about his, that famous Selma march.
Selma. It's called Selma, I believe.
Selma. I think that's the movie. Yeah. Very good. So you've seen it, Amy?
Yeah, it's a great movie. I want to watch it again, actually, with my kids, but I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I too feel like it'll be a fun movie to watch again, and that's a great way of doing it. I want to watch it with my daughter too.
Right. Fun and painful, right? It's a terrific movie, but boy, it's painful, of course, on many levels. But it has a failure in it that you're thinking of.
Yeah, and I mean, for all that's going on, all the ferment in society right now, there are probably a lot of good lessons there, about leadership. So the one that I'm remembering is there's a moment where there's one of these young Turks, right? This like doer who really wants to take that, anti-racism, civil liberties struggle to the next level, accelerate it, amplify it, etc. He's got a lot of energy. And so he's pushing Martin Luther King to be more decisive and assertive and accelerative. And Martin Luther King is talking about some experience that they had, I think in a previous kind of, a moment in New York, I think New York State, it was Albany or somewhere. And the man is basically cynically saying like, yeah, but that, you failed there, that didn't work.
Right.
As they were saying like, look, your formula doesn't work. And Martin Luther King recognized that. And he said, yes. And this is what we learned from it. And this is what we learned from it. And that's why this is what we're going to do now. I've
got to find that scene. That could be a good classroom piece, right?
Yeah. It's always struck me.
And then if you reframe it that way, there's no failure. I mean, it's all, it's just discovery. It's just learning. It's just, I like to talk about execution as learning, as a frame, right? Because I think we think of execution meaning got to get things done, right? And there's whole books written in our space about execution, the key to success. But often that brings up a mindset of just do it, right? Versus do it mindful that your hypothesis for what's needed might be wrong. Right? So you act, and you act in good faith, right? You do the work in good faith. You deliver the product. You conduct the interview, and then it turns out you're wrong, like you were missing something, and that's got to be okay, because we live in this VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. So we're going to be wrong often. And if we're not profoundly open to what our experience has to teach us, we're not really doing our job.
Yeah, we are going to be wrong often. What a powerful and humbling kind of idea to offer us, right? I mean, what do you think of this? I imagine that part of the impulse we have to want to go into a very sort of singular path mode of like, this is the plan, this is what we'll execute, and this is your role and this is your role. Is it coming perhaps from a place where we hunger for certainty and like simple resolution of like the questions in our world, and we are just uncomfortable with staying in a state of ambiguity?
Oh yeah,
some kind of adaptability, right, to the moment.
I think that's a very uncomfortable place for people, for humans, right? We're turns out, there is research on this. It's not mine, but we are hardwired to prefer certainty, and then we kind of expect certainty, rationality, fairness. I mean, that's our default cognitive expectations, and then reality just keeps knocking at them, and sometimes we miss those knocks, and just we see what we expect rather than what's actually there. But other times we're tuned in and we know we see what's happening, and then we're probably erroneously upset by it. Like we're upset by it and we waste valuable energy being upset rather than saying, oh, that's what's so, right? What does that mean, right? What do I do with that new information, with that new awareness?
Yeah, I love that idea of reality coming knocking, and then sometimes we miss hearing those knocks. I use a phrase of truth coming knocking. Truth coming knocking to on our door, and are we going to be open to receiving it?
Right.
Very similar in spirit. There is a dear friend and renowned psychotherapist of our times, Dan Siegel from UCLA, and he as part of his work in bringing in some neuroscience and some meditation, mindfulness, practices into mental health, into therapy, he has used a phrase which I've also been really drawn to, that I think kind of speaks to this kind of maturation of the human condition that you're talking about. He calls it basically being able to open yourself up, like creating an open space of possibilities.
Right.
As opposed to the need to always have your opinion or your view, and confidence and certainty, an open space of possibilities. What do you think of that?
I think we get so much messaging, in our upbringing and culturally that says you're supposed to be right and you're supposed to know and you're supposed to, have plans and follow through on those plans versus being open to what life is bringing, and being open to what others are saying. I mean, truly open. There's, it's been said by many, but the notion of, are you listening to learn, or are you listening just to, wait until it's your turn to speak? And it's of course a profound difference, and it's a palpable difference if you're listening to learn. It's a gift.
Yeah. Listening to learn. How beautiful. How beautiful. We have a couple of comments from our friends in the audience, and so I'm going to just kind of use those.
Yeah, I've seen some comments now.
Okay. So here's the one that is, can you give us some example of like a smart or
probably a good idea, right? Thank you for that question, because otherwise it's just an abstract notion. So let me give you the one that comes to mind, and I don't think it matters what company or where, because I want to say it in such a way, it's true, but to say it in such a way that's sufficiently generic. A consultancy, a services, a business services firm, let's say, and this is true, is aware that there's starting to be more competition in its domain, and a lot of other providers are able to do quite similar things. And so it starts to think about, the top team start to think about, what other services might we provide? And they come up with an idea that's quite different compared to their usual offerings. It's new, but they believe that it would be valuable and help clients. So they decide to, they kind of let people know they're up for this. They let clients know they're up for this. They get a request to deliver this kind of service. And a couple of months go into this project, a small team, client. It fails, right? It doesn't make any difference for the client. It doesn't, nothing changes. I mean, the team does some really wonderful work, but it doesn't land where it needs to land for the client to actually take action. So they go back and try to figure out what went wrong. Now, I call this a smart failure, because they were trying to innovate. They had this sense that there's an opportunity here, right? More is needed from us. Clients need things we aren't doing. This might be something they need, and yet the project is a flop, right? So they go back and try to figure out, and they are able to figure out why it didn't work. A lot of their old biases that come from the traditional services they offer absolutely were wrong and got in the way of doing this new service well. So having figured that out, then they try it again. And at this point today, this is about 40% of their business, right? So it's a smart failure because there was opportunity there. They had a really good hypothesis, but they were blinded by some of their assumptions about certain things they would have to change in their own behavior to make it work. Having figured that out, then they were able to move forward. So smart failure, right?
Right.
Dumb failure would be a company launches a new service. There's senior team debates it. There's people on the senior team who absolutely know that technically and from a staffing point of view, we are not capable of pulling this off. Nonetheless, business development loves it or marketing loves it. They announce it to the world. They decide to go ahead anyway, despite those concerns expressed by operations and human resources. And then the thing leads to just thousands of complaints and all sorts of problems. That's a dumb failure, right? Because they could have known better had they listened to their own internal experts. So an intelligent failure is new territory. Like literally, we haven't been here before. There's no playbook I can pull off the shelf to tell me how to do it well. Dumb failure is the information was there, but you didn't access it for whatever reasons.
Yeah, that is a beautiful distinction. I'm going to try to now merge them because there is another situation that I have seen people struggle with, which is when in a new situation where you're saying if you fail there, well, that could be a smart failure because it was new. In a new situation, you apply more of like a knower kind of mindset where you just don't budget enough, let's say time or the design to make sure that there's some experiments, there's some research, there's some flexibility. And so it ends up being, like a dumb failure because you should have realized that you didn't know much.
Yeah, this is why I think design of experiments, let's say, is a team sport, right? And if you have failed to harness the collective intelligence, go back to your earlier phrase, then you've put yourself and your colleagues at greater risk than was necessary. There's always going to be risk, right? There's always uncertainty, and especially in new terrain. In new terrain, there's a lot of uncertainty. But make sure you come armed with the knowledge you do have. and are clear-eyed about the knowledge you don't yet have.
Yeah, yeah. There's a comment from a dear friend, Joe Kearney. She's saying, how do you encourage psychological safety in life and death learning environment? Pharma, military. I know you've done a lot of your work in healthcare, so I'm sure you can speak to this from real experience.
Yeah.
By the way, also remind, how safe is it for people to fail and share in those environments? It also reminds me of a beautiful story you have about like where you first started to uncover some of these
Sure.
these trends and themes about when you were doing your doctoral work, I think it was. It would be great for you to share the story.
Right. So let me start with thanking Joe for that wonderful question. And the short answer is that in my experience, there is even greater appreciation of the need for psychological safety in high-risk environments like healthcare delivery, like pharma, like airlines, passenger airline, and military, right? It's far more likely. Now, I don't want to imply that it's going to be consistent across organizations in those industries, but it is far more likely than in the average corporate setting that they have really thought about and are aware of the critical need for everyone's voice, given what's at stake, right? That in fact has been the theme that runs through the cockpit resource management training that over the past 30 years has transformed passenger air travel into a ridiculously safe activity, right? I don't mean ridiculous, I mean, astonishingly, ambitiously, magnificently safe activity, because they have resolved to ensure that voice is heard, to ensure that all small and large mishaps are learned from and then incorporated. And that's because it's far more direct and obvious to them what the consequences are, and therefore they've often built leadership structures to enable that. But here's the really challenging and true observation. I think airlines are rather consistent nowadays, but when you talk about, let's say, healthcare delivery or the military, unfortunately, we have still a lot of variability. So we'll have pockets of just fantastically well-run patient care units or military groups, and then we'll have pockets where people are terrified. And the results, unfortunately, are pretty clear too of that. And so you rightly tie this discussion to some of my early research in graduate school, which was research that actually, maybe epitomized a smart failure in that I had a hypothesis that was drawn from the research in the aviation industry that better teams in hospitals would make fewer errors. And that, that makes sense, right? Teams that had good leaders, good quality relationships, clarity about the goal, all the things that you would want your team to have. I could measure that with a previously validated survey instrument. And meanwhile, in this study, trained medical investigators were out going to the patient care unit. So from a research point of view, very nice design, because there's independent collection of the dependent variable. I'm not doing it. I'm just waiting for those data to come to me. They collected those data for 6 months. I did my survey in month 1. And when I finally have the data on both sides of the equation, I have what at first looks like a lovely, significant correlation between teamwork, let's say, and error rates. All right, so this is good. Better publish, here we go. And then I notice, doesn't take too long to notice, that it's in the wrong direction. Whoa, what's going on here? The data seemed to suggest that according to the team diagnostic survey, better teams didn't have lower error rates. They had higher error rates. Which is like, what is going on? And so I then was struck, not immediately, but after a couple of hours of pulling my hair out, by a blinding flash of the obvious, which was maybe better teams don't make more mistakes. Maybe they're more able and willing to talk about them. And this, there's many of you are thinking right away, yeah, but how do you know? And we don't, right? We don't know. What we learned from that study was that, in fact, it is desperately hard to get the actual error rate. What you get more often than not is the detected error rate, because it's easy to hide errors, especially those errors that didn't spiral out and cause harm, right? Those are easily hidden. We all know that, right? We know that from wherever we work. And so that's true in healthcare also. And it doesn't take much thinking to realize that the ones who are talking about it are likely to be safer places to be admitted, right? You don't want people hiding. You don't want people hiding from the boss. You want people coming clean and being open. So that was the stumble. My hypothesis was wrong. I was ultimately not able to weigh in one way or the other about that hypothesis, but I was able to show from those data one interesting thing, which was that even in two very strong organizational cultures, the groups, the teams within those organizational cultures had vastly different climates, right? Interpersonal climates. At that time, I didn't have the term psychological safety for that, but I just knew, wow, it's really different to work over here versus, one floor up. Even though they have the same CEO, the same basic resources and training programs and so on. And that taught me, and this is a theme we can go further with, but that taught me that the leaders in the middle may be the most important leaders you have, right? It's leaders at the top are, of course, important to creating your culture, but it's the leaders in the middle who are shaping the climate for voice.
That's powerful. It reminds me of another, piece of research in recent times that has shown, and I'm forgetting the source. I don't know if this was one of the Google studies or from one of the HR, expert firms out there, that showed that the key reason people leave is not necessarily the culture or the C-suite.
Yeah.
It's the manager, right? There's something that they're not experiencing right. So any leader aspiring to create a certain kind of culture really needs to work on upgrading anybody who's taken on a management role. I like to think of it sometimes in the following way, like, would we give anybody an airplane to fly if they weren't like fully certified with like all the skills they need to know? Because like, why would we put 250 lives in that person's hands? But here we are in our discipline of management and business, and we happily, promote people to having direct reports. And now you're in a position to really make or break that person's happiness, their career success, their contributions at work, maybe even leave lifelong kinds of, impressions, on them. And we sometimes are doing that in organizational life without that rigor, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah, we do. And, I'm just looking at Maggie's Riyadh's comment. We've been talking, or at least my examples earlier were about the risks of not hearing from people about concerns. But psychological safety is just as pertinent for not hearing from people about ideas and not having people, be willing and able to kind of push back and make their case, right? So let's say if an executive shoots down a perfectly good idea, in a psychologically safe environment, the person will push back and say, "Hey, let me try that again." In a sense, they're taking responsibility for not being compelling enough yet. But here's how I'm thinking about it, and then they might open it up. What do others think? Like, what experiences do you have that might take this perfectly good but still incomplete idea and take it the next step, right? Psychologically safe teams are better able, even with hierarchy, to kind of push ideas. No ideas are perfect, just right out of the chute, right? We gotta work on them and make them further. But psychologically safe teams are more able to capture and integrate the collective wisdom.
Yeah. Amy, I want to sort of like explore the the boundaries of your kind of vision, for a couple of minutes. After my doctoral work, I ended up going to work in management consulting. So I was at McKinsey, and in my first few months, I found it really hard to be, at my full potential in terms of contributing, particularly in team meetings, particularly when they were like senior partners of McKinsey there or senior clients there. And I saw, some others, including my peers, be a lot more free form, their natural self, their best self, etc. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on. And what was going on is that I had come from a mathematics background. I used to love math. I really struggled in the second half of my 20s decade to unwean myself from my hunger and love for math so that I could ready myself for a career beyond just pure math. I was loving it so much, but I realized I wanted to be more engaged in the milieu of society and all of that.
Yeah.
So the thing that math had sort of at that point embedded in me is the binary nature of sort of life, which is you're either wrong or you're right, and there's nothing in between. And so what would happen in these meetings is that I would put a lot of filters on my thoughts because I was doing a lot of internal checking in my mind. Am I convinced that this is a valuable contribution to make here, that I'm offering the right solution? And 99% of times, I would say, I'm not convinced yet. This could have this flaw, that flaw. And so I wouldn't offer it up. And what I noticed with the others is that they were more comfortable just offering it up. And I would say, at least the McKinsey, culture that I was part of, I wouldn't say that it was not promoting psychological safety. I think it was more an inner constraint that I had on myself, in that moment. So I want to ask you, to what extent do we need to be concerned with the middle layer? To what extent do we need to be concerned about changing the cultural kind of mindsets that senior executives have to be thinking about? And to what extent do we also need to empower and equip and just make people, collectively feel more open and comfortable in bringing their thoughts and ideas, as long as the workplace is not.
Yeah. No.
What are your thoughts on that?
I sometimes think about this. I wish I could be more precise about this, but all of us have likely some threshold, right, above which we'll speak and below which we won't, of confidence about what we're going to say. And I think all of us intuitively know that some people set that threshold too low and some people set it too high. And it sounds to me like you were setting it too high. Unless you felt you could do the rock solid mathematical proof of your idea, you weren't going to let it out of there, right? It was going to stay inside.
Right.
That's too high because often, sometimes what you have to say is incomplete. But guess what? There's someone else on the team who could add to it and make it better. And you deprive them of that opportunity by not letting it out. But meanwhile, all of us also know that we've been on teams where people set it too low, right? Where they're just saying everything that comes into their head, and it's not helpful, and it slows us down. So my way of thinking about this is that there are more people in workplaces, hierarchical workplaces, that set it too high than too low. The people who set it too low, they, in well-run organizations, do get feedback, right? It's kind of like, Hitendra, we love you, and too often you're taking us off purpose. And here's an example. So in other words, all of us, by the way, need and deserve feedback. So that's part of our job. We have to give people feedback because nobody comes to work and says, gee, I really hope to be ineffective today and, have my colleagues think I talk too much and don't add value. Nobody wants that, right? So when they're doing it, we owe them, right? We owe them an opportunity to learn and grow. It's harder to develop the people who've set it too high because we don't get the data. We don't know what's going on in their head. And more often than not, they're holding back treasures. Which is why I say that by and large, when I'm talking about creating psychologically safe environments, I'm talking about lowering the average threshold, not to zero, right? But just on average, it's going to usually be set too high. And there's this wonderful study by N.O. Simpson at University of Minnesota, and it's in a manufacturing setting, and he shows that he does an interaction effect between confidence and psychological safety. And he shows that at the same level of confidence, about what it is their expertise or whatever. With more psychological safety, people will be more willing and able to contribute. Right? Doesn't mean they'll always be right, but it means that they're in a far better position to harness the collective intelligence because it's coming out. We're able to play with it.
Right. Very nice. There is a question here from Urvashi. Let's see if I put it up. Amy, do you have any examples for influencing leader inclusiveness from the bottom up? I'm fascinated by your work and using that concept.
And by bottom up, I'm assuming like the leaders who aren't at the very top, like just people throughout. I mean, what are things that anyone do? And
that's what I'm thinking she's saying, yeah.
And to me, I would start. I start with the phenomenal power of questions, and I mean genuine questions. Right? So that my argument is that anyone can influence the psychological safety of their own team or their own colleague by asking a genuine question, a work relevant, genuine, like Hitendra, what are your ideas on this decision? What thoughts do you have about this, this project? And then of course, so I've asked that question. I call that a good question because it focuses us on something that matters. And it's phrased in such a way that invites care. It invites careful thought. And it hands the space over to you to respond. Of course, it's really important that I now listen. It's right. I've given you a platform for voice. Now, if I walk away or start interrupting you, that's not gonna work as well. But now I listen. Now I listen, and now I react. Right. So in that moment, now this might not be durable forever, but it might. In that moment, we've created a little bubble, right? A little bubble of mutual attention to something relevant. And that's something that literally anyone can do. The reason we don't do it well and don't do it often enough goes back to our cognitive frames. We have this erroneous sense of seeing and knowing reality, rather than we don't have enough of an appreciation for, wow, I don't know. What am I missing? Right? If we woke up every morning with that enthusiasm about learning, we'd be more curious. And if we were more curious, we'd spontaneously ask more questions. And if we asked more questions, our colleagues would know we cared about their voice.
Yeah. This idea of creating that, what did you call it? It was a beautiful phrase, that shared bubble, of like a space where we can discover and uncover. That's beautiful. It reminded me of, again, that phase of my life where I was in strategy consulting, and I know it's a very popular direction for many of our students to take, right, at HBS and CBS. Yep. And one of the things I think that discipline ends up honing in us is that you are in that situation. You are in the situation where the power is held by senior client executives, and you are ultimately just a consultant. You're not a line manager. You're not going to execute or own this, but you are there as a whisperer in the ears, right, of some guidance and advice. So you have to be in a position to, on the one hand, have a voice. After all, that's what they're paying you for. You have to be able to shape. You have to be able to influence, but you don't have the authority, in most of those cases, to do that. And so all of these, skills around using storytelling and, as you said, sometimes posing it as questions just to open people up, rather than, so you may come in with a lot of convictions, but you don't just play all your cards out right there, and lay them down. You're holding back, you're using appropriate, tactics to influence, shape, inspire, guide people to the right answer.
Yeah, and I would make a distinction, and I value them both, but I would make a distinction between curious questions and Socratic questions. And the Socratic questions are those that are, it's not necessarily that there's a right answer, but that there's at least a framework or a domain that I want to lead the client to, or I want to lead the class to. And so I ask questions that head us in that direction, but make them take ownership of it, help them take ownership of it.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, you can go awry in asking those kinds of questions when you make the mistake of, there's certain kinds of questions where you inadvertently are trying to make them guess what's in your head, and it just doesn't work, right?
Right.
It's blend. It's got to be a blend of letting them draw from their experience and their thinking to take us where we need to go. So that's Socratic. We do have a destination in mind, but there's various ways we can get there. And I need your help. But the genuine question where I sort of, say, hey, Hitendra, where did you grow up? I don't have an answer in my head already. I don't know, right? I want to hear about it, and I want to hear about and I'm all ears.
Yeah.
And I think there's a place for both kinds of questions in today's workplace. And, one of my great mentors and advisors was a professor called Chris Argyris, who spent his entire life devoted to understanding why learning breaks down in conversational worlds at work and what to do about it. And one of his big insights was, we spend an awful lot of time telling and very little time genuinely asking. Even if you analyze questions, many of them are of the rhetorical or leading kind. You expect me to believe that? That's not a genuine question.
Yeah, I remember Chris's work going back a few decades when I was at MIT doing my PhD, and I think the learning organization and Peter Senge and his work and all was starting to get very super.
It was fantastic as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Beautiful. We have a precious few minutes left in our conversation today, and I want to move the conversation into a different space and move from leadership to life. It's something that I'm very drawn to in how we evolve our dialogues even in a business school classroom and in executive arenas, which is to really connect the whole person self. I know, Amy, that's something you're also very drawn to. You've spoken about it a few times in some really powerful ways. What like your work is implications are with regard to the need to have a more whole person view. And then as soon as you take the whole person view, you got to think about life just as much as work.
Right.
And so I find that the ideas and thoughts you're expressing, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it, are as applicable in making us good citizens, making us good siblings, making us good parents and good children and members of a community as anything else. Because don't we need to foster the same kind of value of being open to failure, learning from failure, being learning oriented in everything we do? I mean, Gandhi said it beautifully. He said, learn as though you're going to live forever, right? And up until your dying breath, just keep evolving and learning. And psychological safety, let's say as a parent with a lot of authority over a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, et cetera. Thoughts, reactions?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think these are, what I'm talking about ultimately does boil down to the inner journey, the growth, our own willingness as adults. And it's not easy, right? But our willingness to keep learning, to keep growing. And that sounds like fun until you realize that also means the willingness to be wrong and to be limited. I mean, as you get to be a kind of a working adult and then a working adult who's been working for decades, it can feel psychologically like the stakes are very great indeed. You can't be wrong. You have to be experts suffer from this challenge of I'm the expert. I'm supposed to know the answers. Just true, but experts are generally in rather narrow domains, and reality is complicated and crosses complex, really, and crosses domains. So unless we are willing to be, I think, fundamentally humble, right? Humble in a strong way, right? To acknowledge that, yes, you have an awful lot of knowledge and expertise and to give, but also a lot we don't know always. And we'll have to keep learning because the world will keep changing. So humble, curious, willing to learn, willing to ask, and empathic, right? To have a very serious and deep appreciation for the reality of others, right? That others are human beings as well, who have their own feelings and needs, and each of us isn't just the center of the universe.
Yeah, that quality that you've just described, the humility with the curiosity and the empathy, and yet grounded in your convictions, it just kind of sparked a memory in my mind. Many, many years ago, we came back from a dinner, at some friends' place, and my daughter looks aghast, at me and my wife, and she says, "We forgot my frog there. We have to go back and get my frog." And it was an origami frog,
Yeah. Not a living frog.
Yeah. So we were like, it's tired. We're all tired. It's late at night. We have this origami paper at home. So your mom will make you a new frog in the morning, all right? So, but now it's time for you to go to sleep, Nalini. So go to sleep. And she was like, "No, I want my frog. I want my frog." And then my wife and I are starting to feel like, we're not like parenting her well, because here she is, rebellious. She's not looking at the clock. It's late, and demanding instant gratification. Wanting a frog now and all of that. And it went back and forth a couple of times. And at one point again, I said, "Nani, we're going to make you a frog in the morning. Now you have to go to sleep." And she said, "Well, if you make me my frog in the morning, it's not going to be the same frog. I want my frog. I don't want a new frog. I want my frog." And it was a very humbling moment. It was a very endearing moment. And I realized in that moment, like how limiting my frame was. My frame was that it's about now versus morning. But actually, the frame was like, please get me this frog that I've grown into so much affection with. If you're going to be so casual about my relationship with my frog, maybe you're going to just like leave me somewhere at summer camp and then just want to make another baby instead of getting me back. Anyways.
It all stems from these fears, right? It's all about these deep fears, right? The fear of being left alone, kicked out of the tribe, and that breeds this need to be right. When really we long for connection. We can and must keep helping ourselves long for growth and development, but we protect ourselves against growth and development in ways that aren't always very helpful.
Yeah, so true, so true. So given the centrality of these ideas, as much in life as in leadership, first, I just want to thank you, Amy, for contributing so much of your life's work, right, in an area that I really think is helping advance organizations, advance cultures, but also in many ways advance humanity at both the micro level of the kind of things we can build into our families, as well as the macro level of what we need in organizations and society at large. What is your big dream at this point when you look at the next decade of your career in life?
I don't have a good answer. I need a better answer, but I suppose given our conversation, a part of that dream is to have the kind of the courage and fortitude to keep doing my own inner work, right? To keep it's a lot easier, as all of your listeners know, to talk about these issues than to live them in a real way. We all love to be right. We don't like to be disagreed with. So the aspiration is to keep learning and growing and occasionally coming up with something that resonates, that other people find useful. And you started this session by saying, you've done this research and long ago you found that it connected to practice. I live for people like you who are able to take some of the little things I've found and then take them further. So I appreciate that.
No, I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I mean, it's a beautiful quest you're on. I was also just thinking, Amy, that if you look at the history of knowledge at a mass level, you had the Gutenberg press moment where knowledge was just very local to people's heads or communities, but suddenly it became available at a mass level with books. I was reading back in the 1300s or 1400s, this biggest library in Europe was in Paris, and it had 300 books in it. And then, of course, the internet has taken this whole thing to a whole new level.
Right.
And it's almost like, if you were to think about it, like the lived truths versus the published, known, accessible truths, that gap is just starting to grow and grow and grow, isn't it?
That's a very good way to put it, I think. And then we need new ideas about how do we reduce that gap, right? That particular gap. I think that's a very powerful insight.
Yeah. So any thoughts on that? Anything that you have seen work well in getting these ideas in people who are well-intentioned? I'm sure a lot of executives that you interact with end up buying into this thesis.
Yeah.
But then 2 months later, a year later, 2 years later.
Yeah, the short answer is do it, practice, right? You don't get good at the sort of the learning routines without doing them, practicing them. But oftentimes when we say practice, that immediately brings up a notion of, offline, later, when we're not busy working. No. Practice in the process of doing the real work, making the decisions, interacting with the clients, whatever the work is you do, caring for patients, make that the arena of practice, of what Don Shern used to call reflection in action. Because the more we practice while doing the work we need to do, I think the better we get at that inner side of it. But that has to be done consciously and attentively.
So it's a great thought. At a very, very sort of micro level, my wife and daughter used to live most of the time in India because we were raising her, there to go to school. And now she's graduated. Now she's coming to college, so she's back here in New York, and we're getting used to spending all our time together as opposed to a fraction of our time away and a fraction of our time together. As part of that, my wife has noticed that when I leave the apartment, the door sometimes bangs, behind me. It's not that I've willfully pulled it, but there's some air or some wind, in the corridor in the apartment, and that just pushes the door in that kind of way, which is a little bit noisy. And she has been so attentive to every time that happens to bring it to my notice. She will text me if I'm walking out of the apartment or if I'm walking in, she'll let me know. And the first time, I didn't really conform. The second time I didn't conform. I want to do it, which is hold the door. Don't blame it on the wind, which I unexpectedly came. Hold the door and gradually just move it to the right. So that it's, anyway. But having had that nipping in the bud, from her on several occasions, I'm starting to finally get into the habit of doing it the right way versus the wrong way.
You can learn, right? You're able to learn. Exactly. No, that's a good metaphor because I grew up in New York and we had one of those doors too. And if you don't close it, it slams. That's just the way it was, a heavy door.
Yeah.
And the problem, okay, so what? Well, the so what is it is heard by others as anger. Right? You slammed the door. No, you didn't, right? But so you have to. But I like the idea that you could learn. Right?
Yeah.
And that your wife was willing to give you the feedback rather than just roll her eyes.
Yeah. So beautiful. In closing, then, Amy, let me just ask you one thing. I have this hypothesis, which partly was something that Steve Jobs spoke about. He in his Stanford commencement address, perhaps you've heard it. It's so well regarded. He speaks about how you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. And he makes so much meaning out of seemingly just random moments in his early part of his career and life that much later on bore so much significance to the kind of vision and ideas and thoughts that he was putting out there. And I wonder, Amy, when you look back at the arc of your life, you talk about growing up in New York, and you've taken root in Cambridge, Massachusetts over the last few decades. What do you see as the early shapers that may have in fact sown the seeds for your values, your outlook on life and the world, that has led over the years for you to make this your calling, make this the kind of work that you're advancing humanity along?
Well, thank you for that hypothesis, the advancing part. But it certainly traces back to my parents, my family, a great emphasis on service, a great emphasis in my family, extended and nuclear, on what is it you can do for others, and your job here is to make the world a better place, in the small or in the large. it's not about just satisfying your own needs and desires. And that might sound like a sort of overly unselfish perspective, but it actually isn't, right? Because life is far more meaningful when lived in a sense of connectedness to others. And I think all of us, or at least my upbringing led me to long to be of service in some small way, even to be able to make someone's life or day better in just a little bit, I think is a rewarding thing for people.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. Here is a really great summary from Deepak as to the takeaways that he's taken. Humble, curious, empathetic, simple but great takeaways from today. And perhaps we can add to that this quality of servicefulness that you have shared, that you learned from your parents and really sought to assimilate in practice. That is so beautiful. Just a final remark from you to bring us to closure. If there's one thing that you want everyone here to really carry back, take to heart, some one thing that you would want to encourage them to practice, let's end on that note, Amy. So offer that platform to you.
Practice good questions. Right? The art of good questions, that's in your hands every day. There are opportunities, countless opportunities to do that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amy. I know you've got a couple of articles that you've written recently in Harvard Business Review, in addition to the book, which are sharing some of your newer, fresher thinking and research. We're going to share some links and connections with everyone for those. Thank you for passing them on to me as well. It is such a joy to have you in this conversation here today and to discover even more about your path and work and what you see for the future. I hope that we'll get a chance to bring you back to this audience sometime soon. So very, very grateful for all you do and for making this time for us today.
It was a pleasure, and the time flew by. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. All the best in your journey ahead. I'm sure we are going to be in touch and hope to have you back here as well. Thank you, Amy.
All right.
Right.
Bye.
Right. Take care. And then, my friends, thank you for joining us. The comments have been so rich all the way through. Amy was doing justice to some of them. I was striving as best I could because I really wanted to tune into all the beautiful thoughts and ideas that she was expressing. I think we're learning so much, isn't it, from Amy's journey and conversation. The connection she made between the broader aspirations she had to serve and the particular way in which her research, her work at Harvard Business School provides her a unique personal path to having that kind of impact, to helping advance humanity forward, to challenging some of the ossified ideas and practices in big business, etc. And then within that, of course, this frame of continuing to learn as a team, as an individual, as an organization. Perhaps those are ideas that even a society could benefit from. Amy and I didn't have the opportunity and time to talk about that, but with what's happening, for example, in the United States, the kind of polarization that we are struggling with, and perhaps some of these issues that are happening at the international level as well, maybe bringing in more of a learning orientation, more of a commitment to questioning, more humility, more empathy, recognizing that my position, while I feel it's right, I may not know everything yet. I may not have discovered everything about the other party. Maybe those are things we can apply at the family level and all the way to the society level with the ideas that Amy's been fostering more at the organizational level. We're going to come back and reach out back to you with what we're going to have as our next intersections. So bear with us, and and we will be in touch with you on that in the next few days. In the meanwhile, I want to thank you for joining us today for a very spirited dialogue. Grateful for all that you're bringing as well to this conversation. Thank you and all the best. We will see you in 2 weeks' time. Take care. Bye-bye.